Hello and welcome to another episode of Hair Bear Short Stories. And if you found your way to my cozy little corner of the internet and you like a story or two, sit back and relax, have a listen, have a laugh, take your shoes off, and set a spell. So if you hung with me through the last chapter and you haven't walked away in disgust, we'll continue on with the series today. I had to take a little bit myself and I wrote a little bit more. I've got chapter 9 completed, so we're up to chapter 6, so I'm kind of catching up with myself here. I probably ought to get going. I think the entire thing will only be like maybe 13, possibly 14 chapters. We'll see how it pans out. I've got a loose outline in my head, but I might add more as we go along. Maybe there'll be an epilogue. Maybe there'll be a sequel. I really doubt it, but we'll see. But today, we'll continue on with chapter 6 of Whole, and this chapter is called Hangover. Ben woke with a start, and regretted it. He flopped back from the half-sitting position to which he had spasmodically raised himself and uttered a heartfelt groan. One of life's great comforts is the gradual and welcome realization that the terrible experiences you've just undergone and would change your life forever were actually a fevered construction of your slumbering brain and overactive imagination. As each event is dissimilated from reality and filed in the brain's junk folder, you can sink back into your eiderdown, secure in the knowledge that the real world holds nothing but regular, everyday horrors. Then, there are the other times. The times when, instead of the welcoming embrace of your bedsheets, you begin to sink into a black hole of despair as, with growing dread, each terrible memory is reviewed and found not to be an ephemeral imagining, but undeniable fact. You did say that to the person you have a giant crush on. You did send that text to your ex. You did, in fact, believe, in the face of all evidence and experience, that you were the lord of the dance. Scruff really did die last night. Ben desperately tried to spin the facets of his fractured recollections to fit some deep-seated neuroses that would inspire such a dream, and came up with nothing. As his brain sluggishly went through the standard boot-up process, it was increasingly inundated with complaints that had been patiently queued up behind the door all night. A particularly urgent one shoved its way to the front of the line and jumped up and down on his gag reflex, causing Ben to vault from his bed despite his body's screaming protests, scrabble awkwardly across the floor, and pitch his head out the window to completely destroy the pH balance of the vineyard soil. Well, that explained why he hurt so much. Getting roughed up by a moose and Ralph Lauren could only have contributed to his current state of body, but nobody got this miserable sober. He wasn't a stranger to the effects of excessive drinking. One can hardly spend much time in the valley and remain ignorant of such. But he had somehow managed to reach an even more rarefied plane of awareness. Awareness, that is, of every nerve in his body, and how much they all hated him at the moment. He guessed it also explained why, no matter how hard he tried, he could remember nothing past the image of a small, furry body rolling limply in the dust. Too bad he hadn't drunk enough to erase that as well. He didn't know where he had even gotten that much to drink. He never kept that much on hand, and didn't have enough money to get that blasted even on the cheap stuff. From Gato, probably. Gato always seemed to have a cache of unlabeled bottles filled with evil-smelling concoctions of questionable origin and definite alcohol content hidden away somewhere, slowly dissolving the glass. After what had happened, he surely would have opened one with Ben, and maybe brought him home, too. Made sense. As Ben lifted his head from the windowsill and wiped something unspeakable from his face, his eyes rested on something else he had no memory of. Ben knelt by the patch of disturbed earth at the edge of the rows, which was marked by a small, crude cross twisted from grapevines, and sobbed. His vision of the humble grave blurred, and the tears stung the scratches he was suddenly aware of on his face. He was scratched and scraped up everywhere. His clothes were torn, his hands raw, his knuckles skinned. He didn't remember feeling the injuries at the time, but he must have fought like hell. Not hard enough. Not enough to save the life of the brave animal that had appeared out of the darkness like an avenging angel to save his friends. The noble soul which had blossomed under Ben's care and friendship, taken by the casual cruelty of a sociopath with a license for his behavior purchased with family money. That such individuals not only existed, but also enjoyed the comfort and privilege of wealth and social status was an affront to everyone who labored for the betterment of the world. to someone like Gato, whose hard work, patience, and guidance brought the harvest that made the valley what it was. And Scruff, who had bestowed Ben with such loyalty and devotion simply for sharing his modest life and home. That such a person could simply roll through their lives, destroying at their leisure for the simple enjoyment of causing pain was an abomination, a perversion of humanity. Ben opened his eyes. He had not realized he'd gotten to his feet. His body thrummed with tension and pain, ready to... What? There was nothing here to rage against, no one to fight. Only acres of quiet vineyard, the verdant smell of the earth, and the sounds of soft morning bird song. Last night was gone, done and dusted, and there was nothing for it but to pick up the pieces and try to move on. To do that, though, he needed to find Gato and make sure he was all right, and find out if the tractor still needed attention. Not the least, to ask him what the hell was in his private stock, why it was not officially registered as biohazardous material, and where he could get some more of it. His stomach gave another lurch, attempting to empty the contents that it did not in fact have. Okay then. First, he needed to consult a hangover expert to dampen his stomach's aspirations of bulimia, and perhaps to prevent his head from splitting in half as it had been threatening to do since his return to consciousness. Luckily, Ben knew just the person and where she would be this morning. Strangely enough, the person in question wasn't Nana. It wasn't that Nana never drank so much as to experience deleterious side effects. She just never really stopped drinking long enough to have them. No. After taking the time for a quick wash and change out of his torn clothes, Ben was headed to a different tasting room, not far away.
Ronnie, have you been editing the tasting notes again?
A petite figure at the wine bar with a pixie haircut dyed a faint purple at the ends turned, paused from industriously buffing a gold nameplate on her lapel reading Veronica Campbell, and said, Carol waved the printout in front of her.
I don't remember having ratings for awesomeness ranging from okay I guess to hells yeah.
Ronnie, with the tone of one returning to a familiar argument, replied,
It's all just so boring, Carol. How will we be any different from all the stuffy old guys in town if we don't shake things up?
We've been through this, Carol sighed, laying the sheet on the bar.
Those old guys have been around since the 70s for a reason. Yeah, because they did something new and kicked ass at it, Ronnie replied a little petulantly. Because they earned the respect of the establishment, Carol retorted, not unkindly, but with a firmness of long-held conviction. We're never going to get anywhere if we're not taken seriously. Do you have any idea how many businesses in this industry fail in the first year?
Ronnie squared her shoulders and struck a heroic pose.
Never tell me the odds.
Carol raised a quizzical eyebrow and looked back blankly. Ronnie rolled her eyes and returned her attention to her nameplate.
Perfectly good movie references are wasted on you. Honestly, I can't believe we're related.
Further argument was forestalled by the mutual awareness of how improbable it was to reconcile the points of view of a business major and a wine enthusiast. An unlikely pair, the two sisters had grown up on their father's vineyard in the northern end of the valley backed up against Howell Mountain. When he passed away from a sudden onset and aggressive form of cancer, Carol used the money from the sale of a portion of the vineyard she had inherited, none of the best parts of course, and several savvy business investments, to found Chance Vineyards. Ronnie had picked the name, and Carol, who shared her sister's taste in obscure literature, if not movies, decided it fit. Though she didn't like what it insinuated about their father, she thought two sisters struggling for legitimacy was appropriate. At first, Carol had brought Ronnie along with her on the venture, only because she couldn't imagine them not doing it together. She had resigned herself to the fact that Ronnie, still taking classes at the Culinary Institute, also on a scholarship, and supplemented by money set aside from the property sale, would be somewhat of a hindrance until she matured a little. She was surprised to find that Ronnie had a particular flair for presentation, advertisement, and sales. Ronnie was almost solely responsible for the layout and decor of the tasting room and sales area, as well as the design of their front sign and various advertisements, though Carol did have to curb some of her more unconventional ideas. She had firmly vetoed Ronnie's enthusiastic plan to make a full-size costume of an anthropomorphic grape cluster so the business could have its very own mascot/sign dancer named Bunches, even when Ronnie had volunteered to wear it herself. She effortlessly developed a rapport with people, which, coupled with her knowledge of their product, made her a natural saleswoman. It wasn't just about moving product, though. It was just the way she was. She was interested in people. She listened to their stories, remembered personal details when they returned, and fostered cordial professional relationships with them. Like that one boy that came by all the time with his notebook and paid with old dollar bills when he bought anything. Regardless, she spent as much time working with him as anyone else, if not more, being a fellow wino. She made the winery more than just another startup. She made it part of the community. She would never tell her so directly, but Carol was nearly certain that the business would have already failed without the contributions of her ebullient little sister. She shook her head fondly and returned to her paperwork. It was half an hour before opening, and Ronnie was polishing glasses when the front door opened hesitantly. Ronnie liked early customers, which was why she unlocked the door before opening time. They were either enthusiastic to try the wine or just to get drunk, both of which were her favorite kind. Never one for posing, she kept polishing while she prepared to deliver a friendly greeting, and one of her regulars appeared in the doorway.
"Hey, Booger,"
she called brightly, because that was her nickname for Ben. She wasn't exactly sure why, only that it made him confused and a bit flustered, and that was reason enough for her.
"What'll it—"
And then she felt the blood drain from her face as the morning sun, slanting through the windows, played across his battered profile. 20 minutes later, Ronnie and Ben were sitting in the back room by the sink, with a first aid kit lying open beside them. The counter was littered with spent alcohol wipes and bandage wrappers, as Ronnie saw to the worst of Ben's injuries. As a former tomboy who grew up tearing around the woods and fields, she knew her way around cuts and scrapes and was satisfied that nothing needed stitching. For Ben's other medical condition, she'd prescribed a greasy breakfast and peppermint tea. The tea was close at hand, due to her wide range of beverage preferences, and in no small way due to how often she found herself in much the same condition. In the absence of a decent fry-up, they had made do with a microwave Hot Pocket from Ronnie's emergency stash in the cupboard. Naturally bubbly though she may be, low blood sugar didn't do good things for her or anyone in her general vicinity. Ben sipped at the tea, though the Hot Pocket remained untouched and lukewarm as he recounted what he could remember of the previous night. Ronnie's ministration slowed to a halt, and eventually all she could do was listen. A Band-Aid hung forgotten from one hand, while the other covered her mouth, as she stared in rapt horror at Ben, who numbly relayed his story as one still in shock. He eventually drifted into silence, and only by dint of great effort did Ronnie manage not to burst out sobbing, though a single rebellious tear slid down her cheek.
"Oh, Ben."
She threw her arms around him in an impetuous hug, but drew back at his sharply indrawn breath.
"Ooh, sorry."
"That's okay," Ben winced. "I think a couple ribs are bruised."
"Jesus, Boog. Have you called the police or anything?"
Ben shrugged. "What would I say? I didn't recognize them, and I couldn't see the license plate." He had actually heard the name dropped in what had passed for witty banter among drunk, entitled assholes, but he didn't tell her that. He knew exactly how much good it would do for him to file a complaint about one of the Valley's elite. He didn't want the kind of trouble that could bring, and he definitely didn't want Ronnie to get caught up in it.
"You could at least report it and give their descriptions,"
Ronnie persisted.
"You said there was one big beefy one, a little weaselly one, and they were following the lead of—"
"Oh." She trailed off as something clicked. "What is it?" Ben asked. Ronnie's face darkened as she remembered cleaning up the spilled wine and broken glass, and the derisive laughter as the door slammed shut.
"I think I might know who it was."
Gato drew the curtain shut against the late morning sunlight and compulsively crossed himself for the 10th time in the last 5 minutes. His family had already left for the day, but he could not bring himself to leave the house. The crew knew what needed to be done today. He had called Guillermo and said he was sick. He told him where the tractor was and that completing the repair shouldn't take them long. Guillermo had seemed concerned about the whole business because Gato never called out sick. He had come to work once in a rainstorm with a mild flu that had developed into a raging fever. They had to drag him back to his house nearly unconscious, dump him on the couch, and set someone to watch him for the next 6 hours to make sure he didn't die. Gato did his best to reassure him that he wasn't dying, joking that it was better he stay home this time rather than waste their time babysitting him again. Not completely mollified, he had noted Gato's instructions and hung up. Gato put down his phone. His hands were shaking. He crossed himself again. He had not more than a passing acquaintance with the religion he had been raised with for at least 20 years, but now, in his darkened house, he prayed fervently. Had he done the right thing? Of course he had. It was the only thing to have done. Anything else would have drawn police attention toward the vineyard, and not all the guys on the crew had a resident status that was exactly official. His crew was his responsibility, and he had to look out for them. He had been careful. Nothing would lead back to them or him. Skills gained in his misspent youth had seen to that. It had disturbed him how easily they had come back. Gato's phone rang, and he jumped 6 inches off the floor from a kneeling position. The laws of physics, being what they are, sent him crashing back down onto his knees, which had done him solid service over the years and didn't deserve such treatment. He groaned and eyed the receiver on the wall. He didn't dare answer. What if it was him? Or at least something that looked like him. Dios mío, he whispered and continued praying. Nana strode through the doors of the Yountville Police Department in a storm of righteous rage. Several officers in the room looked up as she entered and simultaneously remembered they had important things to do somewhere else as she bore down on the hapless duty sergeant. These men, who had no problem handling anything from rowdy drunks to local gang members, wanted no part of Nana in a mood. Young Veronica hadn't wanted to tell her exactly why she had asked Nana to check in on Ben later today, but it would be a poor lookout for her if a grandmother of her stature couldn't get any information she wanted out of one of her children. While Veronica's father had not been Nana's son, he and his daughters were her children, just as were all the struggling lost souls whom she had gathered beneath her wings like a brooding bantam. Now, one of her children had been hurt, and this bantam had her feathers up. There was really no question whether or not she would be allowed past, but she stopped for 5 minutes to harangue the duty sergeant for the look of the thing. She wouldn't want it to be said he didn't try. She blew past, leaving him with the dejected look of a man who just knew that no matter what happens, he was going to be blamed for this, and showed herself into the captain's office.
"Now see here, Stephen," Nana began without preamble. "Those boys have been at it again. It's one thing to turn a blind eye to a rich young man's shenanigans, but—"
The captain looked up from his desk, and Nana's anger almost completely evaporated in concern when she saw his face. He was pale, haggard, and sunken-eyed, like someone who had been awake all night and hadn't enjoyed a minute of it.
"Oh, dear. What is it, love?"
"I don't know what boys you're referring to, Miss Baker," he said slowly, in the careful tones of one trying to let the other person in the room know that it would be in their best interest to shut up now. "But I'm a bit busy at the moment."
"So I see. When was the last time you slept?"
"We got called out early this morning, that's all," he hedged.
"Oh, yes."
The silence that followed wasn't just the sound of nobody speaking at the moment. It was the silence someone places there with the expectation that it be filled in. The captain put up a brief resistance, but an interrogation room with a battered phone book and a waterboarding bench had nothing on Nana's quiet, attentive stare. The captain's shoulders slumped in defeat, and he looked down at his desk. At 1 o'clock this morning, some residents in the hills reported smelling smoke. Woke them up. They called the fire warden because they were afraid of a forest fire, even this early in the season. It's amazing they noticed it at all, never mind that it was strong enough to wake them up, because it was from a car wreck miles away in the mountains. A shift in the wind, I guess.
"Fancy that,"
said Nana ambiguously. She did feel badly for pushing the man, especially since he looked like he'd been pushed enough for one day, and it hadn't yet gone noon. For some reason, though, he didn't want her asking questions about the boys who hurt her Benjamin. Well then, she would just have to get him to tell her what was going on without asking. "It seems as though they had been out joyriding," he continued, a beaten man, probably under the influence, and didn't see the bend in the road until they went over the edge of the ravine. There were no skid marks in the road, so they hadn't even applied the brakes.
"Oh, dear."
Nanny specifically did not ask. The bodies of the vehicle's occupants were unrecognizable, but what was left of the vehicle had some aftermarket modifications that we were able to trace back to the manufacturer.
goodness.
Nana did not inquire at all. The captain sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose.
We believe the car to belong to the youngest son of the billionaire Desmond Lionel, Christopher, who's been missing since last night.
So I guess it would seem some just desserts has been served. But by whom? By Gato. He'd be certainly capable of it, but if that's the case, what's he so afraid of? What happened to Ben? Why can't he remember anything? Stick around, you might find out. So I'm trying to keep up with at least once a week. It means I need to keep writing at least a chapter a week. So to keep ahead of it. But I hope some people are listening to and enjoying these. I know at least one very special person is. So, but if you did like this, make sure you slap a paw on the like and subscribe button. And hopefully, we'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care, be good, and bear up.